Tate Cahill stood alone at the rail siding outside Millrace Junction, in the thinning gold light of an October evening, turning his last dollar over between two fingers, trying to decide whether it should go toward flour or toward nothing at all, when a sound reached him from the dark mouth of an idle boxcar that no empty car had any business making. He crossed the gravel without a sound and eased the heavy door back on its rollers, and there in the gray straw at the far end of the car, caught in the last of the daylight. Through the gap, a boy of about 10 sat with both arms locked around a little girl half his size, and the two of them stared back at him, frozen and silent, like animals deciding whether there was still time to run. Tate did not step into the car right away. He had spent enough of his life around spooked and cornered creatures, green colts, half-wild dogs, men who'd had too much whiskey and too little else, to know that the worst thing you could do to something frightened was close the distance too fast. So he stayed in the doorway with the last light behind him, and he kept his voice as low and unhurried as he could make it, the way he'd talk down a horse that had gotten its leg tangled in wire. "Evening," he said. "Didn't mean to spook anybody. I heard something and came to look, is all." Neither child answered. The boy's arms had not loosened around his sister. Up close in the failing light, Tate could see how thin the boy's wrists were where they crossed at the girl's back, could see the girl's small hand, fisted in the front of her brother's shirt, could see two faces gone the particular gray-white of children who had not eaten a full meal in longer than was safe. "This car's not going anywhere tonight," Tate said. "Line's shut down here till the Thursday run. You picked a cold place to wait it out." Still nothing? The boy's eyes tracked him the way a cornered animal's did, not blinking, weighing distance, weighing exits, weighing whether the man in the doorway was a danger or merely an inconvenience that hadn't decided yet what it was. Tate had learned, a long time ago, in circumstances he did not think about often, that some silences were not rudeness, some silences were armor, and a person did not get to that kind of silence by accident. He lowered himself down to sit on the edge of the doorframe, one boot still on the gravel, and did not come any closer than that. "I'm not going to ask your names," he said. "Don't need them. Don't need to know where you're headed or where you come from or what you're running from, if that's what this is. Man doesn't need a reason to see two kids are cold and hungry." The girl's eyes moved to him then. Just her eyes, the rest of her still tucked into her brother's shoulder. "We ain't done nothing," the boy said. It was the first thing either of them had said, and it came out sharp and rehearsed, like a line he'd had ready for whoever eventually found them, whether that was a railroad bull with a club or a sheriff with a badge or something worse than either. "Didn't say you had," Tate said. "Wasn't thinking it." The wind picked up outside, carrying the first real cold of the season through the open door, and Tate watched the girl shiver and watched the boy's jaw tighten at the sight of it, watched him make some private calculation about how much longer he could hold out before the cold became a bigger problem than the stranger in the doorway. Tate took off his coat. It was not a good coat. The elbows had been patched twice, and the collar had gone thin. But it was warmer than nothing, and he set it down just inside the door, well within the boy's reach, and did not move any closer to it than that. "That's there if you want it," he said. "I'm going to sit right here a minute, and then I'm going to walk into town, and there's a woman there who keeps a kitchen going past dark on Thursdays for the rail crews. I intend to be sitting in it, eating supper inside of 20 minutes, whether anybody comes with me or not." He did not look at the children while he said it. He looked out at the darkening yard, at the shape of the water tower against the last band of orange sky, and he let the offer sit there without pressure on it, because pressure was the one thing he understood from old experience, that this particular kind of fear could not survive. It was the girl who moved first. She unfolded one small hand from her brother's shirt and reached, slow and testing, for the edge of the coat, and the boy let her, though his eyes never left Tate's face, and Tate understood that whatever had happened to these two before tonight, the boy had appointed himself the only wall standing between his sister and the rest of the world, and he was not going to lower it easily, and he was not going to lower it for a stranger's kindness alone. He would lower it, if he lowered it at all, an inch at a time. Tate could work with an inch. An inch was more than he'd expected when he first crossed the gravel. To understand why a broke man's answer to two strange, silent, half-frozen children was to hand over his coat and his last dollar without a second thought, it helps to understand Tate Cahill's own childhood, though he was not a man who volunteered the story, and nobody at Split Creek had heard the whole of it. He had been raised for his first 10 years on a hardscrabble spread in eastern Kansas by a father who worked himself into an early grave and a mother who did the best she could with less than enough. When the father died, thrown from a green horse he'd had no business riding in the state of exhaustion he was in, the mother lasted 2 more winters before a fever took her too, and Tate went, at 12 years old, to work for wages on other men's land, because there was no other direction available to him. He had worked a dozen outfits since, across 3 territories, breaking horses, mending fence, riding nighthawk on herds too big for the hands assigned to them. He was a decent hand, and a reliable one, the kind an outfit kept through hard seasons because he didn't complain and didn't shirk. But he had never once been the kind of hand who got ahead. Wages went to boots and food, and the occasional debt paid off for some other drifter worse off than himself, because Tate had made a rule for himself around age 14 and never broken it. You fed a hungry person first and sorted out the rest of it later, and you did not spend long deciding, because deciding was a luxury for people who had never gone 2 days without eating. This was why, at 28, Tate Cahill owned 1 coat, 1 good knife, a saddle he was still paying off to the saddler in Millrace Junction, and exactly $1, the entire remaining sum of his worldly wealth. He had been hired on 8 months back at Split Creek, 3 miles south of town, run by a young widow named Hazel Doyle, who had inherited the place from her husband, along with a drought that had gutted 2 seasons running and a note at the Millrace Bank that grew heavier every quarter. Hazel paid what she could, which by autumn had shrunk to little more than his board, and she had told him plainly that she'd understand if he rode on to find better paying work elsewhere. He had not ridden on. He told her the ranch suited him and left it at that, which was true as far as it went, though it was also true that Tate Cahill had never once walked away from something that needed him simply because it couldn't pay him what he was worth. It had gotten him nowhere, financially, in 16 years of working other people's outfits, and he had made his peace with that a long time ago. So when he found 2 children in a boxcar with nothing to their names but each other, he did not run the arithmetic on what it would cost him. He had $1. He was going to spend it. That was the whole of the decision, and it took less time to make than it took to describe. Magee, Ferris kept a kitchen going behind the Millrace depot for the rail crews on the nights a freight was expected through, and she was still wiping down her counter and thinking about banking her stove when the bell over her door rang, and she looked up to find a lean young ranch hand she recognized from town, leading in 2 children she had never seen in her life, one of them wearing a man's coat that dragged nearly to her ankles. She did not ask questions either. Mrs. Ferris had run a kitchen in one rough town or another for the better part of 20 years, and she had learned to read a room fast, and what she read in the doorway that evening was plain enough. 2 starving children and a young man with his jaw set in the particular way of someone who had already decided something and did not want to be talked out of it. "Sit them there by the stove," she said, nodding toward the table nearest the heat, and went to work without further comment. She brought out stew thick with potatoes and what meat she had, and fresh bread still warm enough to steam when it was broken open, and a pitcher of milk, and she set it all down in front of the boy and the girl with the same brisk, unceremonious manner she might have used serving a table of rail workers, because she understood, the way certain people simply understand these things, that the last thing 2 frightened children needed was to be made a spectacle of their own hunger. "Eat slow," Tate told them, sliding into the chair across from them. "Small bites. Man I knew got sick as a dog once. Ate too fast after going a long stretch without." The boy looked at the food and then looked at Tate for a long moment, as if waiting for the catch, for the price that was always attached to this kind of thing in whatever world he had come from. And when no catch arrived, when Tate simply sat there, hands folded on the table, watching the door and not the children, giving them the small privacy of not being watched while they ate, something in the boy's shoulders came down half an inch. He ate slow as told. His sister did not manage it quite as well, and twice Tate reached over without a word and moved her cup of milk a little further from her elbow before it could spill, and neither time did she flinch away from his hand the way she had flinched, Tate had noticed, from the swing of Mrs. Ferris's apron when the woman passed too close to the table. When Mrs. Ferris came by to ask if the gentleman wanted supper for himself, Tate said he'd already eaten, which was a lie, and a poor one, given that his stomach chose that exact moment to make its opinion known, low and unmistakable, across the quiet room. Mrs. Ferris looked at him for a beat too long to have believed it. She did not argue with him in front of the children. She simply returned a few minutes later with a slice of pie, unasked for, and set it down in the middle of the table, where all 3 of them could reach it, and said it was left over from the noon crowd and would go to waste otherwise, which everyone at the table understood to be a kindness dressed up as a fact. It was the girl who spoke first, in a voice so small Tate had to lean in to catch it. "Thank you," she said, to the pie or to the room, or to no one in particular. "You're welcome," Tate said, as if it were the most ordinary exchange in the world, because he understood without being told that ordinary was the thing these 2 children needed most, and had probably had the least of, for however long this had been going on. When the bill came, Tate paid it with the whole of his dollar, counted out in coin across the counter, and did not so much as glance at what that left him, because there was nothing left to glance at, and there had not been any real question in his mind, from the moment he'd opened that boxcar door, about how the dollar was going to be spent. Full dark had come down by the time they reached the turnoff for Split Creek, and the girl, Tate still had no name for her, though the boy had begun answering to a small "hey" now and again, had fallen asleep against her brother's shoulder somewhere along the last mile, worn through by a full stomach and warmth, and a fear finally allowed to loosen its grip. Tate carried her the rest of the way. She weighed less than a sack of feed corn, which was its own quiet horror to think about, and he did not think about it long, because it made him want to have a conversation with whoever had let this happen to her, that he doubted would end peaceably. The ranch house window was lit when they came up the lane, a low, steady lamp glow that meant Hazel Doyle was still up doing books at the kitchen table, which she did most nights now, turning over the same figures in the hope that turning them over enough might change what they added up to. She heard the dogs before she heard footsteps, and was at the door with a shotgun half raised out of pure habit, before she made out Tate's shape in the yard, and then saw who he was carrying, and the shotgun came down slow. "Tate Cahill," she said, in the tone of a woman requiring an explanation, and prepared to wait exactly as long as it took to get one. He told her. The boxcar, the two of them, no names given up, the supper at Ferris's, the whole of his $1 spent on it. He told her he understood if she couldn't take on 2 more mouths on top of everything the ranch was already carrying, and told her, in the same breath, that if she couldn't he'd bunk them in the barn loft with him, because he was not putting them back on that boxcar tonight or any night after. Hazel looked at the sleeping girl in his arms for a long moment. She looked at the boy standing close beside Tate's leg, swaying with tiredness and still, even now, positioned so his body stood between his sister and the woman in the doorway. She had buried a husband 2 winters back, and had spent every season since learning exactly how much a person could carry before something in them gave. And she knew, looking at that boy's careful, exhausted vigilance, that she was looking at someone who had learned the same lesson a great deal younger than any child should. "Bring her in by the stove," she said, already turning back into the house. "There's stew left if the boy's not eaten. He's eaten. Ferris fed them both. Then there's bread, and there's a bed in the back room that hasn't been slept in since—" She stopped herself, the way she still sometimes stopped around anything that touched the shape of the husband she'd lost, and started again. "There's a bed. It'll do for tonight. We'll sort the rest in daylight, when I can see what I'm sorting." She got blankets from the chest at the end of the hall and warmed water for washing, and moved through the small tasks with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had decided something the moment she'd looked at that boy's face and had no intention of revisiting it. Tate laid the girl down on the narrow bed, and she stirred but did not wake, and the boy climbed in beside her without being asked, still fully dressed, one arm thrown over her the way he must have slept every night of whatever journey had brought them here. Hazel stood in the doorway watching them a moment, then looked over at Tate, and something passed between the two of them that neither one put words to that night. Some shared understanding that whatever this cost them, on a ranch that could barely feed itself through winter, they were already in it together, and neither meant to be the one who backed out first. The names came the next morning, offered without much ceremony over a breakfast of eggs, and the last of the previous day's bread. The boy said his name was Jeb. His sister, prompted with a small nudge, said hers was Iris, and then ducked her chin down toward her plate, as if she'd given away something valuable and wasn't sure she'd meant to. No last name came with either of them, and Hazel did not ask for one, and Tate did not either, though both of them noticed the omission, and neither remarked on it, because both understood, without needing to discuss it, that a last name was very often the first thread a frightened person held back, and that pulling on it too soon was the surest way to lose the rest of the thread along with it. Tate gave up his room that first week, the small room off the tack shed where he'd slept since taking the job, the one with an actual door and an actual stove, and moved his bedroll up to the barn loft instead, telling Hazel it made no difference to him, and telling Jeb, when the boy noticed and got a stubborn, unhappy look about it, that a man who'd slept in worse places than a warm barn loft for most of 16 years wasn't about to start complaining now that he had 2 extra reasons to keep the good room heated. Jeb did not entirely believe him. Tate could see that, but the boy let it go, the way he let a lot of things go that first week. Not because he'd stopped noticing them, but because some deeper calculation in him had apparently concluded that this particular household was not, for the moment, worth fighting. He slept badly, regardless. Hazel mentioned it to Tate on the 3rd morning. Quiet, over coffee before the boy was up. How she'd checked on the children twice in the night, and found Jeb awake both times, sitting up near the door of the back room with his sister curled behind him, listening to something neither of them could name. And she had noticed, clearing his plate the first few mornings, a heel of bread gone missing from his supper, tucked away somewhere. Jeb clearly thought no one had seen. She did not confront him about it. She started instead quietly leaving a full plate covered on the back of the stove each night, without comment, so that a boy who had apparently learned to hoard food against a hunger that might return, could learn, slowly and without being made to feel ashamed of the learning, that hunger was not going to come again in this house. It took Jeb the better part of 3 weeks to stop hiding bread. Tate noticed the morning it happened, noticed more precisely the absence of the small furtive movement Jeb had made every night at supper, folding something into a scrap of cloth and pocketing it before anyone could see. And he did not say anything about that either, because there were some victories a person earned quietly and did not need announced. Iris settled faster, the way young children sometimes did, though Hazel noted that she still startled at raised voices and still slept, most nights, in whatever room put her closest to her brother, and still wore always, day and night, a small tin locket on a cord around her neck that she would not remove for washing or for anything else, and that neither Tate nor Hazel ever asked her to explain. Winter came on hard that year, and it came on harder still to a ranch already thin on reserves, and Tate Cahill spent it giving away, in small pieces and without a word of complaint, nearly everything he had. He sold his father's pocket watch to a trader passing through Millrace Junction in November, the one possession he'd carried, mostly unlooked at, through 16 years of drifting, because it was the one thing of his father's that survived the sale of the Kansas homestead. He didn't tell Hazel or the children what the money was for until Jeb and Iris turned up 2 days later with real winter boots, properly fitted. The first new boots either of them had likely owned in longer than either would say. He took on extra day work at the livery in town on his Sundays off, mucking stalls and mending harness for whatever coin the owner would part with, and told Hazel it was because he liked the extra activity, which she did not believe for a minute, because she'd done the same arithmetic herself and understood exactly what that coin was quietly buying. A coat for Iris that reached her wrists, a decent knife for Jeb, once he showed an interest in whittling small, unremarkable things that added up across a hard winter to nearly everything a poor man had to give. He ate less. Hazel noticed his portions shrinking through the autumn while the children's grew, and one evening in December she set his plate down heavier than usual and told him plainly that a man doing a full day's ranch work could not run on what he'd been eating, and that if the two of them were going to feed this household through winter, they'd do it together, evenly, and he was not going to solve the arithmetic by starving himself quietly where he thought no one was counting. He accepted the fuller plate without much argument, because there was no arguing with Hazel Doyle once her mind was made up, and because, if he was honest, it was a relief to have someone share a weight he'd been carrying alone, meal by meal, since October. "You don't have to keep doing this," Hazel told him once, watching him mend a strap of Jeb's boot by lamplight instead of resting after a full day in the cold. "Nobody's asking it of you." "Nobody has to ask," Tate said, not looking up from the leather. "That's most of the point of it." She did not have a ready answer for that, and found, watching him work by the low light with the unhurried care he brought to everything, that she did not especially want one. She had married a man once who loved her steadily and without much display, and she recognized something of that same shape in the quiet, unasked way Tate Cahill had folded two strange children into the center of his life and simply begun carrying them, without complaint or ceremony, and without any apparent expectation that the carrying would ever be noticed, let alone repaid. By the time the worst cold broke in February, Tate Cahill owned, by any honest accounting, less than he had owned in October. One coat again, this one borrowed from Hazel's late husband's things, because his own had gone to Jeb for a spell before the new one came. No watch, very little coin. He did not, at any point, appear to consider it a loss. Spring came slow to that country, as it always did, but it came, and it brought the first real signs that something in both children was beginning, cautiously, to unclench. Jeb took to the horses the way some children take to water, as if some part of him had been waiting his whole short life for exactly this. The quiet, wordless trust between a boy and a good, patient animal, a trust that required no explaining yourself, no protecting anyone, no flinching at the wrong sound. Tate started him slow, with grooming and feeding and the long, unglamorous work of simply being around the horses until they stopped being strange. And within a month, Jeb was asking every evening whether he could help with the feed. And within 2, he had a favorite among the ranch's small string, an aging gelding named Duster, soft-mouthed and even-tempered, who seemed to understand, in whatever way horses understand these things, that the boy on his back needed him to be careful. "Your pa teach you to ride?" Tate asked once, watching Jeb walk Duster in a slow, careful circle around the corral. Jeb went quiet a moment, the way he still did whenever a question brushed too close to what he wasn't ready to talk about. "He used to let me hold the reins sometimes," Jeb said finally, "on the wagon. Not really riding, just holding them." It was the first time he'd mentioned a father at all in 6 months, and Tate did not push for more than that single sentence, though he filed it away, building slowly an outline of a life before the boxcar he still couldn't have described in any real detail, only that it had, at some point, held a father who was no longer in it. Iris found her own unclenching in the kitchen garden Hazel put in that spring, along the south wall, a plot gone to weeds the 2 winters since her husband died, and that Hazel hadn't had the heart, until that spring, to put right again. Iris took to the digging and planting with a fierce, absorbed concentration. Hazel found herself watching from the porch some mornings, coffee going cold in her hands, because it was the first time she'd seen the girl entirely forget to be careful. She sang while she worked, sometimes, snatches of a tune Hazel didn't recognize, simple and repetitive as a lullaby, and once Hazel asked her, gently, where she'd learned it. Iris said, without looking up from the row of bean seeds she was pressing into the dirt, that her mother used to sing it, and then went quiet in a way that told Hazel not to ask the question sitting right behind that one. Hazel did not ask it. She had learned alongside Tate the particular patience this required, taking what these 2 children offered when they offered it, and never reaching for more than what was freely given. By May the garden had rows. By May Jeb rode Duster alone around the near pasture, no one walking beside him. By May both children had put on enough weight and color that a stranger meeting them fresh would not have guessed from looking at the winter that came before it. But they still would not give a last name, and Iris still would not take off the tin locket, not once, not even to bathe. The trouble started, as trouble in a small town usually did, with talk that meant nothing to the people repeating it and everything to the people it was about. Tate had taken Jeb into Millrace Junction in early June for the twice-monthly supply run, a trip the boy had started asking to come along on once he trusted the wagon seat beside Tate, more than he trusted being left behind, and they were loading flour and salt at the mercantile when Tate half heard, through the open door, two men on the boardwalk discussing a notice that had come through on the last telegraph wire. "It offering a reward is what I heard. Substantial one. 2 children, boy and a girl, missing since last fall from somewhere out east. Rich family. Railroad money," somebody said. Railroad money don't usually lose track of its children. Well, they have now. Been asking all up and down 3 states, apparently. Every station agent between here and the Missouri lines got the description. Tate had not thought much of it in the moment. Travelers passed through Millrace Junction with 100 rumors a season. Most of them exaggerated past recognition by the time they'd crossed 2 counties, until he glanced over and saw Jeb standing frozen in the mercantile doorway, sacks of flour forgotten at his feet, his face gone the same gray-white it had been the evening Tate first found him in the boxcar. "Jeb?" The boy did not answer. He grabbed the nearest sack of flour, hefted it with more force than the task required, and was back at the wagon before Tate had finished saying his name a second time. They rode back to Split Creek in a silence Tate did not try to break, because he had learned over 8 months of careful patience exactly which silences could be pushed and which ones needed room. But that evening, after Iris had gone to bed, Jeb found Tate alone at the corral fence, checking a gate hinge that did not particularly need checking, and stood beside him for a long moment without speaking. "You hear what those men were saying?" Jeb said finally. It was not quite a question. "I heard some of it. You going to send us back?" Tate set down the wrench he'd been holding and turned to look at the boy directly, because this was not a moment for looking at gate hinges instead of a child's face. "Jeb," he said, "I don't know what happened to you before that boxcar. I've never asked, because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready, if you ever got ready, and that was your business and nobody else's until you decided otherwise. But I'm going to tell you something plain, and I need you to hear it plain. I am not sending you anywhere. Not you, not your sister. Not to satisfy some rumor on a telegraph wire. Not to collect some reward. Not for any reason at all. You understand me?" Jeb's jaw worked for a moment, the old defensive set of it Tate hadn't seen in months coming back into his face. "You don't know who's looking," Jeb said very quietly. "You don't know what she said she'd do." "Then tell me," Tate said. "Whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere either." Jeb told him 3 nights later after Iris had fallen asleep, sitting on the porch steps in the last of the June warmth. He told it plainly, in pieces, and Tate fit them together as they came. Their name was Calder. Their father, Edmund Calder, had worked as an engineer on the rail lines his own father built, and the spring before last, a trestle bridge he'd been inspecting after a bad flood had given way beneath him. That had been the end of their father, quick and quietly settled by the company within a season, because the work did not stop for grief. Their mother, Louisa, never recovered from it. She had always been frail, prone to fevers that came and went with the seasons, and losing her husband seemed to take something from her that her body could not replace. By the following winter she too was gone, leaving Jeb, 9 at the time, and Iris, barely 4, in the care of their grandfather, Augustus Calder, who owned, among a great many other things, the very railroad that had killed his son. "He wasn't a bad man," Jeb said carefully, as if the distinction mattered and he needed Tate to understand it. "He just didn't know what to do with us. He got busier after Pa died, not less, like the work was the only thing that still made sense to him. He put us with a cousin, said it was temporary, said he needed to get things settled. The cousin was a woman named Agatha Pruitt, distant enough in the family that Jeb wasn't sure how they were related, and for the first few months her household had been merely cold rather than cruel, a woman enduring an imposition rather than raising children she wanted. It got worse over the winter. The support money arrived late, or short, and Agatha Pruitt's thin patience ran out along with it. She began withholding meals as punishment. She began saying, within the children's hearing, that a boy Jeb's age could earn his keep at a work farm 2 counties over, and a girl Iris's age would do just as well at a foundling home where someone else could deal with her crying. She said it like she'd already decided, Jeb said, his voice going thin. I wasn't going to let them split us up. I wasn't going to let them take Iris somewhere I couldn't get to her. Tate did not touch him, did not interrupt, only sat close enough that the boy would know he wasn't alone in the telling. So, I took her out the window one night, and we walked to the rail yard, and I got us into an empty car, and I figured we'd ride until nobody would think to look for us. He had not planned past that. He had been 10 by then, his birthday come and gone somewhere on the road, unmarked, and he had done the only thing that occurred to him, which was to run and keep his sister close while he did it, with a fierce, lonely competence far beyond his years for nearly 2 weeks, until the car was shunted onto a siding at Millrace Junction, and a broke ranch hand heard Iris crying through the boards. Our grandfather's probably looking, Jeb said finally, staring at his hands. But I don't know if he's looking because he wants us back, or if he even knows what Mrs. Pruitt was really like. Maybe going back is just back to that, or worse, because now we ran. Tate sat with that a long moment, looking out at the dark corral. Calder, he said finally, as in the Calder Pacific, half the rail line between here and the Missouri. Jeb nodded, miserable. Well, Tate said, that does put a different shape on things. Tate did not sleep well that night, and Hazel, from the look of her, hadn't either. Once he told her everything over coffee before the children woke. She heard him out without interrupting. When he finished, she turned her cup slowly on the table. We could keep it to ourselves, she said. Nobody out here has any reason to connect 2 ranch children to a name like Calder. Let the rumor pass through and die the way rumors do. We could, Tate agreed, but you don't think we should. I think if we hide them, we're making a decision that isn't ours to make. Jeb's 10. Iris is 5. They've got no legal standing, no schooling on the books. Nothing that says who's responsible for them if something happened to either of us tomorrow. And if that cousin ever comes looking in earnest, we'd be the ones caught hiding 2 missing children with a fortune's reward on their heads. He turned his cup a slow half-circle. I think the honest thing and the safe thing happen to be the same thing here. I think we do this properly and let it land where it lands. And if it lands with them being taken from us, then it lands with them taken from us, Tate said, and the words cost him more than his voice let on. But taken care of by people obligated to do it right, with a name and money enough, they'll never again eat whatever they can find on a freight car. I'd rather lose them to that than keep them safe here by making them a secret for the rest of their lives. It took another week to bring Jeb around, and it was Iris, in the end, who tipped him, unafraid of Hazel and Tate, both by then, she told her brother, with the blunt clarity 5-year-olds sometimes manage better than anyone, that she was tired of being scared all the time and wanted somebody to fix it. Judge Osgood held circuit court in Millrace Junction the first Tuesday of every month, and Tate and Hazel brought Jeb and Iris before him on a warm morning in late June, and laid out, as plainly as Jeb was willing to tell it, what had happened. The judge listened with the gravity of a man who had heard a great many hard-luck stories, and had not gone numb to any of them. He took down the children's full names for his filing: Jebediah Calder and Iris Calder, spoken aloud for the first time since they'd climbed into that freight car, and explained that territorial law required a formal notice of guardianship to be posted at the land office and recorded with the territorial registrar, a process that would put the Calder name back into circulation in a way none of them could fully control once it left the courtroom. "You understand," the judge said to Tate directly, "that filing this the honest way means anyone looking hard enough now has a trail to follow." "I understand. And you're filing it anyway." "I am." The judge looked at him a long moment, the way a man looks at someone he's deciding whether to trust, then nodded once and reached for his pen. Nothing happened for 6 weeks, and then everything happened in the space of about 4 days. Word reached Split Creek first through the most ordinary channel imaginable: Hazel's trip into town for the Saturday market, where she heard from the dry goods clerk that 2 men in fine coats had come through on Thursday's train, asking pointed questions at the land office, asking specifically whether any guardianship filings had been recorded in the past 2 months for children matching a certain description, and that the land office clerk, bound by the openness of public record, had told them plainly yes, and had given them the name of the ranch. Hazel came home faster than she'd left, and told Tate what she'd heard while he was still unhitching the wagon, and the 2 of them stood in the yard for a moment in the particular stillness of people who have been half expecting bad news and half hoping it would somehow pass them by, and now had to reckon with the fact that it hadn't. They told the children together that evening, plainly, the way they'd learned to tell Jeb and Iris things. No softening, no dressing it up, because both children had shown, over the better part of a year, that they could bear the truth a great deal better than they could bear being managed around it. Iris cried a little, not from fear exactly, but from the particular overwhelm of a 5-year-old confronting a large and abstract thing she did not have full words for. Jeb did not cry. Jeb went very still and very quiet, in the way Tate remembered from the boxcar, the old wariness coming back up over him like a shutter closing. And that night, Tate found him again on the porch steps, in almost the exact spot where he'd told the whole story a month before. "What if it's not him?" Jeb said. "What if she found out first? What if it's her people?" "Then they'll have to go through me," Tate said, and he did not say it as a figure of speech. 3 days later, in the early afternoon of a hot, still Wednesday, dust rose on the South Road. More of it than a single rider or wagon could account for. A column of it climbing pale against the blue sky, moving with a steadiness that suggested purpose rather than any ordinary traffic bound for Millrace Junction. Iris saw it first from the garden and went straight to Hazel without a word. Jeb saw it next from the corral, where he'd been working with Duster, and he was off the horse and moving toward the house before the dust had fully resolved into shapes. A fine covered carriage, 2 outriders on good horses, moving at a pace that ate up the distance fast. Tate came out of the barn at the sound of the dogs and found Jeb already on the porch, planted in front of the door with a hay fork gripped in both hands, thin shoulders squared, positioned exactly where he had always positioned himself, between whatever was coming and the sister behind him. Tate crossed the yard and put himself on the step just below the boy, not taking the fork from him, not telling him to put it down, only standing close enough that Jeb would know, without having to look, that he was not facing this alone. The carriage came to a stop at the edge of the yard, and for a long moment nothing happened at all. Just settling dust, the stamp and blow of tired horses, the held-breath quiet of a scene about to tip one direction or another. Then the door opened, and an old man climbed down without waiting for the driver's hand, moving faster than his years should have allowed. Tate's first clear look at Augustus Calder was of a tall, silver-haired man in a fine dark coat with a gold watch chain catching the afternoon light, his composed face breaking open the moment his eyes found the boy standing on the porch steps with a hay fork in his hands. "Jeb!" His voice cracked clean through whatever composure a lifetime running a rail empire had built into him. He crossed the yard at something close to a run, and Jeb braced, Tate understood later, for almost anything except this, stood frozen just long enough for the old man to reach him, then dropped the fork and let himself be pulled into an embrace, too fierce and undignified for anything a railroad magnate would ever be caught doing in public. Iris came out from behind Hazel's skirts, drawn by something in her brother's posture that told her, better than words could, that this was not the danger they'd feared. Augustus Calder went down on one knee in the dust, heedless of his fine coat, and gathered her in too, and for a while nobody said anything at all, because nothing needed saying louder than what was already being said in the simple fact of three people who had lost each other, finding each other again. It was some time before he'd composed himself enough to stand and turn to the rest of them. His eyes went first to Hazel, then to Tate. "I owe you an explanation," he said, voice still rough, "and a debt I don't yet know how to calculate." Seated at Hazel's kitchen table an hour later, Iris asleep against his side, and Jeb watching him with wary, searching attention, he told them the shape of it from his end. Agatha Pruitt had not reported the children missing for nearly 3 weeks, hoping to find them herself and avoid the shame of admitting what her household had become. And by then the trail was cold. He had put every resource the Calder Pacific possessed into the search that followed. Telegraphed descriptions to every station agent on every line the company touched, hired men combing 3 states, a reward that had grown large enough that strangers in saloons 200 miles away were talking about it, and still nothing, for the better part of a year, until a records clerk in a district office happened to notice a routine guardianship filing, recorded by a circuit judge in a town called Mill Race Junction, naming 2 children whose ages matched a poster that had hung on his wall for months. "I have spent a great deal of money and hired a great many capable men this year," Augustus Calder said, "and none of it found my grandchildren. A judge doing his job properly, and a rancher unwilling to hide 2 children he had no legal claim to. Found them for me?" He looked at Tate. "The filing states you have no material assets to speak of, that you petitioned as a working hand of no independent means. Is that accurate, Mr. Cahill?" "It's accurate. You had $1 to your name the night you found them." "I did. And you spent it. Seemed like the thing to do." Augustus Calder looked at him a long moment, then looked around the small, warm kitchen, the mended curtains, the worn but well-kept table, the 2 children who had put on weight and color, and something that looked unmistakably like belonging, and something in the old man's face settled into certainty. "I have spent my whole life building something enormous out of steel and steam and other men's labor," he said quietly, "and I have discovered, rather late, that none of it weighs anything against what you did with a single dollar and a stranger's hunger." What followed in the weeks after secured Split Creek for good. Augustus Calder paid off the note at the Mill Race Bank in full, then bought the adjoining quarter section outright, and had the deed drawn in Hazel Doyle's name alone, free and clear, so the ranch she had nearly lost twice would never again hang on a single hard season. He established a trust for Jeb and Iris that would see them through school and beyond. But he did not insist, as both Tate and Hazel had quietly feared he might, on taking the children away to some distant house among strangers. He asked them what they wanted, and what they wanted, both of them, without much hesitation, was to stay at Split Creek, with visits to their grandfather and holidays that belonged to everyone. And for Tate Cahill, who had owned, by any honest accounting, less than nothing worth mentioning the night he found 2 children in a boxcar, Augustus Calder did one thing more. He deeded him, outright and free of condition, a working parcel bordering Split Creek's eastern line, good grazing land, watered by the same creek, enough acreage to run a modest herd of his own, and told him, when Tate tried to refuse it, that this was not charity, but a debt honestly paid, and that a man unwilling to accept it was usually the very man who most deserved it. Tate Cahill became a landowner that autumn for the first time in 16 years of drifting, on ground within sight of the ranch house where Hazel Doyle still kept the books most evenings, often with Tate across the table now instead of out in the barn loft, the 2 of them working out the small shared arithmetic of 2 spreads that had, in every way that mattered, already become one. Jeb rides Duster across both properties most mornings, unafraid in a way that would astonish the boy who once stood in a boxcar doorway, daring the world to come any closer. Iris keeps her garden and keeps her locket, and has taught half the ranch hands at Split Creek the words to a lullaby nobody else remembers the tune of quite right. The poorest man in the valley gave away everything he had to 2 children who could not even tell him their names. He never once asked what it might be worth. It turned out in the end to be worth more than he could have imagined. Not the land, not the herd, not even the gratitude of a man who owned half the rail line between there and the Missouri, but the plain, unlikely fact of a family, built one small kindness at a time, by a man who had never expected to have one of his own. If this story moved you, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like it. Stories of ordinary people on the frontier who gave what they had and found, in the end, that it was enough. We'll see you in the next one.